The state has rested in the 32nd final championship round, the Bell Tower Championship, presented by Charleston School of Law. Jonathan Woodward here with Josh LaCrone. And let's start with the opening statements. Shrey Gupta from the University of Virginia gave the opening for the state. It took a while to get to the theme of Follow the Blood. It was a very chronological opening, very classic witness-by-witness type format. What were some of your takeaways from Mr. Gupta's opening?
I tend to agree. Very, very meticulous, very mechanical, not very animated, just kind of matter of fact. He laid out the evidence, which, is very strong against the defendant, but not a lot of flash in that opening statement. Not a lot of emotion for the decedent police officer. I expected a little bit more of that, but very solid on the whole.
And when you say not much emotion, it wasn't. I was expecting to see perhaps some anger, some indignation that the defendant had committed this crime, and it was really almost sort of a clinical type of thing, really explaining how the physical evidence, the blood, those sorts of things were going to lead the jury to what they believe would be a guilty verdict.
Yeah, it felt like we were almost prosecuting a bit of a white-collar crime and not a murder where someone was killed with a baseball bat. It felt very much the opposite of that. So, but again, solid opening. Not the most exciting opening we were expecting.
And I mentioned the theme. Those who see a lot of mock trial rounds often expect to see a very clear theme close to the beginning of the opening statement. We really didn't see that here.
We didn't. They started out with that, what we thought was going to be a lot of emotion. We started out with a photo of the dead officer, but we kind of just lurched into the opening. There wasn't a big, powerful beginning to it. It was very soft, very somber, and a little slow, to be honest, to start out the trial.
I agree. We then went over to Raymond Zhu from Yale University, who did the opening for the defendant, and definitely Alex Everett, first two words out of his mouth,
yes.
Going to the alternate theory of the crime. It took a little bit for him to get to the theme, too. You got the wrong student, you're telling the wrong story. That kind of worked into the opening a little bit later. Definitely felt like a little bit of a higher energy level from Mr. Zhu.
Much more animated. Mr. Zhu, immediately hammered home on the discrepancies in the height, the limp, and the batting stance, right versus left-handed dominance. Hammered on those issues. We knew they were going to. They that's their case in chief. That's what they've been doing on cross-examinations. On the whole, I think, judging the opening statements next to each other, I think Raymond Zhu and Yale comes out on top just a bit because of the animation factor. A little bit more powerful of a presentation on behalf of his client.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I feel like that energy level, or I should say the difference between the two energy levels, seemed to sort of carry through the state's case in chief, where Virginia put on a very calm, clinical, at times almost a somber type of presentation dealing with the death of the officer. And we saw a little bit more of that sort of animated, not necessarily flashy or over the top, but definitely a little bit louder, a little more off the cuff from Yale.
Yeah, just starting right off the bat with the prosecution's first witness, which is the widow of the police officer who was killed. Emotional testimony. Certainly, she didn't cry too much. It was very substantive in nature. We saw some perhaps intentionally placed mascara, so you could see the mascara run, maybe a little bit of gamesmanship there. But the cross-examination was very effective.
It was.
The point of her testimony, sort of afterwards, we felt like not so much what did she tell us, but look at all these things that she couldn't tell us.
Sure. And that was Darby Hobbs from the University of Virginia portraying Robin Wheeler. Shrey Gupta, the same attorney who did the opening statement, went right into the first direct examination, and then Sarah Cohen from Yale doing the cross-examination there. I thought Ms. Cohen very calm, respectful. That's the type of demeanor you really have to have when you're cross-examining a grieving widow, but made the points she needed to make. Mr. Gupta seemed to get a little bit tripped up at one point with sort of a multiple objection on some hearsay and some character evidence with the search warrant.
Yeah, and to be honest, this is a case, again, we talked about in the beginning. The kids have only had this for about 30 days. If this were the case they'd been arguing since August, he would have remembered which paragraph he was talking about.
Right.
A little bit of a trip up. Do the judges notice that? Maybe, maybe not. In a round where everything is so good, things like that could make the difference. And certainly the defense was holding their breath in there for a moment when the presiding judge was under the impression that defense doesn't introduce evidence
Right.
until their case in chief. Certainly not in most jurisdictions a rule, and not in the state of Midlands, but it appears as though he's letting them introduce as they please.
Yeah, that didn't seem to be an issue with any of the other witnesses or really trip up Yale in any substantial way. We went next to Casey Schmidt from the University of Virginia portraying John Defoe, Kate Villani from Virginia doing the direct, Raymond Zhu from Yale doing the cross there. And again, very technical. Mr. Schmidt's direct examination testimony seemed to be the most scripted sounding out of any of the three state witnesses.
I 100% agree. Very traditional Virginia witness. If you've seen Virginia over the years, an excellent, excellent multi-time national championship program. Very scripted. They got him up off the stand, and the arms never stop moving. The hands never stop
Right.
moving. A little biased on cross-examination, I felt. But in general, it's devastating testimony for the defense. There's blood. There's lots of it. It's all over the defendant's stuff, and it's not on any of Alex Everett's stuff. But the one takeaway I did have from it is, boy, did it feel very scripted. Every hand gesture, every crook of the neck, every point to the demonstrative, it felt like they had done it 1,000 times in the last 30 days.
Right. We had a very interesting blood spatter type of demonstrative here. Now, as someone who coached this case here at the Bell Tower Championship, as someone who saw some of the scrimmages, heard what was going on, how common was that type of demonstrative in the rounds here this weekend?
Whenever there's blood in a case, there's always a handful of teams that like to get the blood spatter out. They like to get their paintbrushes out. They like to throw the folks that clean up after the tournament never love those demonstratives. I haven't heard of a whole lot of it. I don't know that it was the most effective presentation because, again, it kind of takes away from the fact that there's blood all over the defendant's things and, none of Alex Everett's blood on any of those things. So is it common? Not necessarily. Is certainly interesting. It's something for the judges to look at. Multiple demonstratives with the same witness, a little risky.
Yeah. I thought that demonstrative was actually very effective. I think sometimes talking about the blood spatter in the abstract can be a little bit confusing. When you see it explained in that way, I do think it makes the testimony a little bit more clear for the jury. What I thought was notable in that particular cross-examination was Mr. Zhu trying to get the witness Defoe, portrayed by Mr. Schmidt, to agree with some characterizations about the side on which the blood was found on the mask. That particular cross pocket did not seem to go too well for Mr. Zhu. Casey Schmidt really held his ground, and I didn't feel like there was a real strong takeaway one way or another, which to me is a win for Virginia there.
Yeah, I thought the point was made very early on. The jury knew where he was heading with that. They understood common sense, right-handed versus left-handed batter. Which side of the face is the blood going to hit? I thought it lingered on a little too while.
Right.
I thought the witness did have good responses in pointing out that, if you're going to hit someone with a baseball bat, you're not going to stand like you're in the batting, box at a baseball game.
Right.
You're going to be looking probably directly at them. And he did kind of diffuse that testimony to an extent.
Absolutely. Then finally, we had Dakota Mansager. They used a little bit different pronunciation, portraying this as a Turkish owner of the Landy's Landing convenience store and gas station. This, of course, portrayed by Dennis Tincelli of the University of Virginia, Alex Piacenti from Virginia doing the direct, Dan Stern from Virginia doing the cross. Lots of interesting things happened here with Mr. Stern's performance.
All Dan Stern. That's the take. Where the witness was excellent, but in general, Dan Stern was here last year in the national championship final round. He is an excellent cross-examiner. He buttered up the jury. He had some funny lines. He walked to the back of the courtroom with that tape measure, and there's not a part of me that doesn't think that was intentional when he stepped over the witness's words, just so the jury was reminded how far away the alleged suspect was that he saw.
Well, the judge is taking the stand, so now it's time for the second half of Virginia versus Yale at the Bell Tower Championship, presented by Charleston School of Law.